This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking with OPB's Lillian Karabaic, who very recently traveled all over our state using only public transportation. And I mean all over. She covered over 1,700 miles in 14 days, riding 38 buses and 3 trains across 22 different travel agencies. She collected stories from fellow riders, learned about the struggles facing the more rural parts of our state, and found herself in communities most of us will never have the opportunity to meet. And Lillian pieced her journey all together in a multi-part series for OPB called Stop Requested. So sit tight because she's brought us some of her favorite stories, audio clips, and travel routes to share with you all. It's Thursday, February 6th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. When I heard that you and Prak, who is the other OPB producer who went along for the ride, were starting the series, I legit texted your boss, because I do hang out with her, to tell her how brilliant of an idea I thought it was. And I literally demanded that you both got raises. And I was like, I know Prak's not under you, but also give her a raise. I need you to know this actually did happen. But how did this project come about?
Okay, so the whole concept behind this was mainly I just wanted to do it. So I have taken, like, I'm a huge transit nerd. I've taken trains in 48 countries. And a few years ago, I did a trip entirely by transit from Dublin, Ireland to Shanghai, China by train.
So cool.
So anyway, this is my fun activity. And I used to work digitizing transit schedules. So like my job was taking transit schedules and getting them into Google Transit and other transit apps. And I worked with all of these rural Oregon agencies. So for years, I was like, it would be so cool to actually go ride all these buses where I like call them up. Buses in this country, it is amazing how many buses are just fly by the seat of your pants operations where, as far as I can tell, a lot of America has buses just sort of wandering around, picking people up off the side of the road. And so I was always really curious about like the agencies in super remote places like Enterprise and Lakeview.
Well, I know in the first episode you mentioned the roll call of station IDs, which most local NPR announcers are forced to do and hate doing, as like an impetus, you know, like where you're just like, where are these places? But now that you said this, now I'm curious, like, how did you choose where you were going to go? Was it just like, where does the bus go? Or did you have like a wanting, you know?
Well, that was the idea is I thought, oh, this would be a really good framework for this trip I've always wanted to do on these rural Oregon buses because it's KOPB FM Portland, KOAB FM Bend, KRBM FM Pendleton, you know,
oh my God, there she goes.
Yeah. And there's 16 of them. So in broadcast radio, as you know, we have to say the legal name of the station every hour. So that's those 4-letter names like KOPB FM Portland. And OPB has 16 different signal transmitters. And so I was like really worried when I started that I would never memorize such a long jumble of letters and places. And I was always taught to like imagine the place as you're doing it. Like sit there and think about the people in Lakeview, think about the people in Enterprise. And there were only a couple places I hadn't been on that list. And so I thought, man, this is kind of like my Oregon bus trip adventure built right in. So actually figuring out if it was possible was really complicated though.
Yeah, so the list, just so the listeners know where you went, I have it as Dalles, Newport, Klamath Falls, Lakeview, North Lake County, Christmas Valley, Bend, Ontario, La Grande Wallowa Lake. Am I saying that right? Wallowa Lake.
Wallowa Lake, yeah.
Wallowa Lake, Enterprise, and John Day. Are there any I'm missing? Didn't you go to Tillamook? I thought, or
Yes.
you drove by or something, you were on the bus.
We had to go down all through the coast. And one of the ones that I think a lot of people are surprised by when they listen to OPB is Glen Eden Beach, which is not even technically a city. It's kind of a community incorporated along the coast. And Glen Eden Beach is a stop on a bus. We did the whole coast in one day, just throttling ourselves all the way from Portland up to Astoria and then down from Astoria to Lincoln City, like all in one. We chained together, I think, 6 or 7 transit agencies. And the bus driver let us get out in Glen Eden Beach and then just on the side of the road do the signal ID for Glen Eden Beach. So if you listen to like the very last of the signal IDs where we're on location, you could hear the roar of the bus in the background because we were literally just on the side of the road, me with my mic.
Yeah. Oh, do you want to explain what you mean by that? Because I don't think, just in case people haven't heard.
Yeah, it was the last episode. We actually like split together one of those legal IDs, but it was actually, we were on location for each of them. So it was KOPB FM Portland, which was at Union Station in Portland, all the way to KOAB FM Bend, which we did in downtown Bend. And so we split them all together. One of the other ones was Eugene, KOPB AM Eugene. We were on the train. So we were like, actually, as we were going through the train station in Eugene, in the dining car doing it, so that we were actually physically in Eugene.
That's so cool. Well, one of the stops I loved hearing about was when you ended up at a Salt Lick sculpture auction. Now, where was that?
That was Baker City.
Okay, now can you explain what exactly a Salt Lick auction is? And can you also go into detail of what these sculptures look like? Because when you were talking about it, I had no idea what to imagine.
This was so cool. So this is an event that's held in Baker City every year. So Baker City is like a small town in Eastern Oregon, and it's got a mix of ranchers and artists. So they like to call it where culture meets agriculture. For 20 years, it's been a fundraiser for Parkinson's research, and they've raised like over $200,000 for Parkinson's research at OHSU. And the whole idea is already licked salt licks, like the kind that cows and horses lick in a field. Baker City local Whit Deschner got the idea for the event when he looked at a salt lick sideways and thought, doesn't that kind of look like a sculpture? So ranchers donate salt licks from their livestock and they get auctioned off. And it's like the whole community comes out for this event. There's also like imposture salt licks. So they'll be sculpted by artists to look like salt licks, but they'll be made out of like porcelain or some other material. And there's
That's
even
so meta.
It's so meta. And they'll be called quote unquote forgeries. You know, they'll get paraded down the aisle and it's a real auction. Like
Yeah. We have a clip.
Yeah.
You want to play it?
Yes.
Let's play the clip.
Well, here we are once again, and doesn't it seem funny? We'll have some drinks and share some laughs and auction salt licks for money.
Now 25, 125, now $50 bill, number 50, number 50, number 75, number 75, now 2, now 200 and a quarter, number 25, 220, it's easy, you just put it in your pocket and take it with you. 200 and a quarter, now half, $250 bill, number 50, number 50, number $50 bill, anybody else?
I mean, it's really hard. If you have never gone out to a pasture, you probably don't know what a salt lick looks like, but they're like originally 35-pound or 50-pound blocks of salt, and they come in all different colors. That was what really surprised me. So there was like pink ones and blue ones, and the animals lick them, so they have little tongue dimples on them. And I really like to see the descriptors of the quote-unquote artists. There were like pictures of the cow or the horse, or even in one case, an elk that peed on one of the salt licks.
What? Someone bought that?
Yes, it's really a community event. Like it's held in the really great music venue that's also a hostel, which is where we stayed. And it is the old elementary school. And so everybody comes out to the old elementary school. It's done as a proper auction. And this year, the Baker City Lions Club took over running the auction because Whit's kind of Parkinson's has progressed to the point where running it was even harder. But he was still making jokes from the stage. It was pretty great.
I'm curious if any of these stops had good food options because you're vegan, right? I remember. Yeah.
I am. Did I mention that? Did I bring it up?
Lillian, you're vegan, so I know. You're like, did I bring this up in our first meeting of ever meeting? Did you find any decent vegan food while you were out there? Like, how did you subsist?
I will say I've been vegetarian my whole life, and I've been vegan for like 25 years, and I'm pretty well traveled, so I can make it work. Both Prakriti and I are vegetarians, so I'm happy to report we did not starve. Mainly, we had options by stocking up at Safeways, which the common rural town will usually have one Safeway. I'm not going to say Lakeview was a shining beacon of food options for us. There was like one burger joint in town that had an Impossible Burger. Same with Enterprise. We were at the local pub, which is Range Rider, and they had veggie burgers, but they had actually run out the day that we were there because the shipment hadn't come in for the week yet. But in La Pine, we had an incredible plate of Chinese food with a portion that was like twice the size of my head for $8. There was also an amazing food truck in the Dalles. So yeah, it all worked out. For meat eaters, so many people recommended the Silver Lake Cowboy Dinner Tree, which Silver Lake is close to Christmas Valley in North Lake County. It's less of a restaurant and more of an experience. There's no menu. Your choice is just between chicken or beef. And originally, it was an actual outpost for traveling cowboys.
Oh, wow. Is it the kind of place where they cut your, like, necktie?
Maybe?
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't imagine you'd make it out there with a necktie.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Well, I also wanted to ask, I told you my favorite stop. Do you have any other stop that was significant in your journey that like is just like sticking in your head?
I mean, I would have loved to stay in Wallowa Lake more. There's really interesting stuff happening out in Wallowa County around queer activism. They have a rural queer stand-up tour that they do around Wallowa County.
Oh, wow.
People Like Us is the name of the kind of Wallowa County queer group. And I think it's really notable because Wallowa County is pretty interesting in that it's very rural, a lot of ranchers, but also a lot of people that love it and have grown up there. Just a very, friendly community in a lot of ways. And also, I mean, you cannot imagine how beautiful Wallowa Lake is if you haven't been there. You just have to go.
Yeah. Something I did notice listening to the show was how nice everyone was to you and Prak on these buses. People were so vulnerable and ready to share their stories. I got to learn about butane refrigerators, which I didn't even know were a thing. I heard about the daily commute of a park ranger and also how long some of these bus drivers' shifts are. Like one spoke of a multi-day shift. Are there any conversations that you had that you're still thinking about?
Oh, definitely. I think I spent a lot of time thinking about healthcare access, like anyway, and it's just such a boondoggle. So many of these transit agencies are mainly supported by funding rides to medical appointments for Oregon Health Plan or Veterans Administration medical, and a lot of them have to go really far, like 5 to 6 hours each way to visit Portland for specialists or chemotherapy. In Christmas Valley, people have to travel like 40 miles just to get labs or to see a dentist. Healthcare access and these overstressed healthcare systems and addiction treatment is an issue in Portland, but it is even worse in rural parts of the state because it's often hours of driving just to access the basic healthcare. And that came up over and over again. Like, you cannot be born in Baker City anymore. And you can't die. Wow. You can't die in Lakeview either. Like, their hospice closed last year. So families have to drive 100 miles to Klamath Falls from Lakeview to visit their loved ones, which is not practical on a daily basis.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, more on Lillian's bus adventures across Oregon.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code SPOTIFY. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code SPOTIFY.
Well, for sure, everybody was super sweet, and we heard these really kind of heartbreaking stories, but I am imagining you had at least like one bad interaction.
A couple times we had people that were really excited to talk with us, but they didn't have a great filter. which I think is something that you experience on a lot of buses, right?
Yeah.
It's like some people are just so eager to talk to someone. And I think there was a lot of fascination with us. Like Prakriti grew up in United Arab Emirates and is from India originally. And so she just was like, for a lot of people, the first time that they had like met anybody that had life experience in the Middle East. And so there was a couple times where it was like, oh, okay, you're excited to learn, but you have a lot of preconceived notions. We did have a moment in Lakeview where we were a little worried because we thought we saw a flag that had a particular symbol on it, but it turns out it was the 92nd Airborne Division flag. But it was wrapped up on its pole, and I'm going to tell you, it didn't look exactly the same. We both had that moment of like our throats jumping into our hearts for a second, and I literally looked up the flag on the internet to make myself feel better.
Well, I know you must have also heard some pretty good gossip while you were on the bus. I mean, just listening in and stuff.
Yeah, I will also say people love to talk. I mean, a lot of these buses are really long. Like some of them, they spend the entire day with the same group of people every week. And, you know, one of the folks that I talked to up in Astoria, Washington, he was like, this is really important to me. I live alone. You know, this is how I connect with people in my community. And he also said this.
It's absolutely the hands down best place to get the best gossip. Like everybody on the bus 100% knows what's going on, what's going down.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I felt like that was definitely true with everyone. I learned all sorts of things, you know, with varying degrees of importance.
Well, another thing I feel like your series did well was just to introduce, you know, some of the biggest issues facing rural communities. Like we were already touched a little on medical access, but then there was also just like access to groceries, you know, and just transportation in general, like people feeling isolated. Can you go in a little deeper on what you learned?
Absolutely. Like groceries are expensive everywhere, as we all know, but they are so much more expensive in rural areas. So Enterprise, Oregon Safeway is the most expensive in the state. A lot of people will travel hours on the bus to get their groceries because even that time is that much cost savings. Also, one of the buses that we rode along with from Klamath Falls to Lakeview was the food bank pickup. And, you know, they talked about how rural grocery access and food deserts is a really, really big issue. I think in Portland, you have to imagine the price difference if you run to a convenience store to get your bread and milk versus going to like a big grocery store. Now imagine if you have to go 60 miles instead of 3 miles out of your way to go to a proper grocery store. That's what's true for a lot of people. Even if they do have a grocery store, like in John Day, all the prices are like double what they might be if you go down to Burns.
God, and the economy is already like, you know.
It's not great. There's not a lot of jobs. And you know, one of the things that we talked about in Christmas Valley, almost everyone moved out there for cheap land. But in Christmas Valley, most people live off the grid, and it can take a really long time to get services out there because there essentially is no electrical grid except for a very small part of town. And the water table, due to nearby hay farms, is very bad. So it can cost sometimes 6 figures to put a well in Christmas Valley. And so there's just a lot of issues with food insecurity in rural areas and in tribal lands. So even if you get SNAP, the monthly amount that you get is the same in Portland as it is in rural parts of the states. And it doesn't cover the gas that you need to get to cheaper options. So in the parts of Oregon most responsible for growing food, getting access to reasonably priced food can actually be some of the hardest.
Yeah, well, you actually brought us a clip that had someone kind of explaining this a little bit more.
And I live in a little studio and it doesn't have a washer and dryer, so I have to go to town, either Lincoln City to my north or Newport to the south. And so I go like once a week to town, like the old stagecoach days, to get my staples. I go to the grocery store, do the library, do my clothes, and go see the sea lions and just with the ocean and whatever. And I got hooked on it, and I've become friends with the bus drivers.
Well, with all this in mind, you know, it's a little heartbreaking to hear that last month Greyhound canceled crucial bus services in Northeast Oregon. Are you at all still in touch with some of the folks you met out there? Like, do you have a sense of what that impact will be?
Absolutely. Actually, I found out about it by being texted from one of the locals who heard about the gossip on the bus.
Oh, no.
And so I'm also in touch with people that heard the series and are regular transit riders in these communities, but I didn't meet when I was on the trip. And, it's a huge blow to Baker City, Wallowa County, Ontario, and Pendleton. There's pretty much no options now to get into Portland for medical services. Or if you live in Ontario, now there's no bus to get to Boise, which is where a lot of people get their medical services. It's really a big kind of stressor. Oregon Department of Transportation does have some money available because Oregon is kind of unique in that we have this statewide transit tax, which funds some of these services. So they are looking into options to kind of help fill the gaps. But it's a big blow. And, one kind of additional piece that happened is last week, the National Railroad Administration released a report recommending that Amtrak come back to Eastern Oregon. And that would fill in this gap, essentially. It would start in Denver, go through Salt Lake, Boise, and then Eastern Oregon. That used to exist, and it stopped running in 1997. And now it's one of the recommended routes to be restored. But even if everything went smoothly, it would still probably be about 15 years before it's implemented.
Oh my God. I was like, oh, cool. So like what, in the summer? 15 years. Holy moly. Oh, that's awful. I hope
new rail is not a fast process.
I'm glad we're hearing, because I think that a lot of Portlanders, especially new ones, are just like, why does Eastern Oregon hate us? And it's like, this is why they hate us. This is why they hate us.
I mean, that was the perspective. The AORTA, which is the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Experts, that's been one of the groups that's really been pushing for the restoration of this train. Their Eastern Oregon vice president, he said that he feels like the reason there's such a disconnect between Eastern Oregon and the big cities on the west side of the state is that people don't feel like they can get between the two. He thinks that having the train would make them feel more connected, especially like job opportunities, stuff like that.
Totally, yeah.
Even just testifying in the state capitol.
Yeah. God, I'm getting all radicalized, Lillian.
I'm here to radicalize you for rail.
Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask what routes you recommend for listeners in Portland who are now eager to travel around Oregon by public transpo. Like, can you share just like two of your favorites?
Yeah, I think you've also referenced this on a different CityCast episode, but the Northwest Point is a bus that runs twice a day from Union Station in Portland all the way out to Astoria, and you can bring your bike on and get off anywhere on the coast. So it's a really good way to if you're want to go on a bike tour, but you don't want to ride 100 miles out to the coast, it's a good way to do it. I actually love to take the Tillamook Wave on the way out, which also leaves from Union Station. And you can stop at the Forestry Center on the way out to Tillamook and then bomb down the hill and go straight to the beach. And it's only about 15 miles to Cape Lookout. And it's even a good winter bike trip because they have yurts over at Cape Lookout. So you can do a full credit card touring, hop on the bus, bomb down the hill, and still get the smugness that we all enjoy as bike tours. But if you want to go to the mountain, I think a lot of people don't realize that both Mount Bachelor and Mount Hood have transit that gets there. So there's the Central Oregon Breeze is a daily bus that leaves from Portland's Union Station, and it goes to Government Camp, Madras, Warm Springs, and all the way down to Bend. And there's a community of riders that take it all the time because a lot of people in Bend will fly out of the Portland airport, and it's cheaper to take the bus than it is to pay for parking at the airport. So it's a super cushy, clean, nice ride. I think it's totally worth it for either a weekend trip to Bend, or if you're worried about driving over the mountain, I think it's a great way to get there when the passes are dicey. And there's a shuttle that Cascade East Transit runs to get to the top of the mountain from Bend during ski season. They even let you bring skis and everything else you need on board.
That is so cool. And thank you for calling that out. I knew that there was a bus that would take you to Mount Hood because I've seen it. It also goes to the lodge, but to Bend, That's awesome. I'd love to go to Bend during the winter, but hate driving. So that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, Lillian, this was absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us, bring us some clips, and also just the chutzpah of you putting all of this together and doing it. Because there's so many people that are like, oh, that would be cool. And you did it. And you actually did it. And like, hooray for OPB for like giving you the resources.
Thank you so much, because I really didn't know if my bosses were going to approve it. So thank you so much for having me. It's a delight. I love listening to CityCast, so it's fun to be on it. If people want to listen to the whole series, we have a podcast version, but then we also have like a 7-part series at opb.org/stop requested. And we're actually doing a live event with PSU on May 8th. So totally free live event. But if you have any burning questions after listening to the series, you can bring them there. And we're going to nerd out with PSU's transportation department.
That is so cool. And we'll for sure also link everything in our show notes, so you don't have to go hunting around. And we will post a Salt Lick Instagram if you give us one.
I will do my best.
Okay. And now for some events happening this week. Every Thursday on the show, we like to bring you a few recommendations to help you plan your weekend. And here's what we got. Tonight at the Lollipop Shop, starting at 8:30 p.m., The Thesis, that's Portland's premier hip-hop showcase, is presenting their first ever all-Spanish show. Now, this looks like so much fun. If I weren't still recovering from a massive chest cold, I would be there. Also, don't forget, it's First Thursday, so there's free admission from 10 to 7 p.m. at the Portland Art Museum, plus a bunch of art to check out at the North Park blocks in the Pearl District. And the opening night for the Portland Winter Lights Festival is happening this Friday after dark at various locations all around downtown. This Saturday, there's also a free Lunar Year Dragon dance parade from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in Old Town Chinatown. You got to go and represent. Come on. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. For even more local events, sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Portland, or go to our website, portland.citycast.fm/events. We'll throw a link in the show notes. Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.